From Follow the Rabbit-Proof Fence, Doris Pilkington. The other girls were now getting ready for school, and the three watched quietly amidst all the activity. Bossing and bullying was everywhere around them, and there were cries and squeals of, "Don't, you're hurting my head," as the tangled knots were combed out with tiny, fragile combs. "Oh, Mummy, Daddy, my head!" yelled a young girl who stamped her feet and tried to pull away from her torturer. An older, well-built girl who seemed to have adopted the girl as her baby sister. They performed this ritual together every morning before school. "Come on, you girls," ordered Martha Jones as she passed by their bed. "The school bell's gone. Don't be late on your first day." "All right. We're coming as soon as we empty the toilet bucket," answered Molly softly. "I'll wait for you then," said Martha. "No, don't wait. We'll follow you. We know where the school is." "All right then. We'll go along. Come on, Rosie," she said as she rushed out of the door into the cold, drizzly morning. As soon as the other girls left the dormitory, Molly beckoned her two sisters to come closer to her. Then she whispered urgently, "We're not going to school, so grab your bags. We're not staying here." Daisy and Gracie were stunned and stood staring at her. "What did you say?" asked Gracie. "I said, we're not staying here at the settlement, because we're going home to jig along." Gracie and Daisy weren't sure whether they were hearing correctly or not. "Move quickly," Molly ordered her sisters. She wanted to be miles away before their absence was discovered. Time was of the essence. Her two young sisters faced each other, both looking very scared and confused. Daisy turned to Molly and said nervously, "We're frightened, Dagudu. How are we going to find our way back home to Jigalong? It's a long way from home?" Molly leaned against the wall and said confidently, "I know it's a long way to go, but it's easy. We'll find the rabbit-proof fence 3 and follow that all the way home." "We gonna walk all the way?" asked Daisy. "Yeah," replied Molly, getting really impatient now. "So don't waste time." The task of finding the rabbit-proof fence seemed like a simple solution for a teenager whose father was an inspector who traveled up and down the fences, and whose grandfather had worked with him. Thomas Craig told her often enough that the fence stretched from coast to coast, south to north, across the country. It was just a matter of locating a stretch of it, then following it to Jigalong. The two youngsters trusted their big sister because she was not only the eldest, but she had always been the bossy one who made all the decisions at home. So they did the normal thing and said, "All right, Dagudu, we'll run away with you." They snatched up their meager possessions and put them into calico bags and pulled the long drawstrings and slung them around their necks. Each one put on 2 dresses, 2 pairs of calico bloomers, and a coat. Gracie and Daisy were about to leave when Molly told them to, "Wait, take those coats off. Leave them here." "Why?" asked Gracie. "Because they're too heavy to carry." The 3 sisters checked to make sure they hadn't missed anything. Then, when they were absolutely satisfied, Molly grabbed the galvanized bucket and ordered Gracie to get hold of the other side and walk quickly, trying not to spill the contents as they made their way to the lavatories. Daisy waited under the large pine tree near the stables. She reached up and broke a small twig that was hanging down low and was examining it closely when the other 2 joined her. "Look, Dagudu, like grass, Indy?" asked Daisy, passing the twig to Molly to feel. "Yue, 5, she said, as she gave it to Gracie, who crushed the green pine needles into her small hands and sniffed them. She liked the smell and was about to give her opinion when Molly reminded them that they didn't have time to stand around examining pine needles. "Come on, run, you two," she said sharply as she started to run towards the river. Many young people had stood under the same big pine tree and waited while someone went into the stable or the garage to distract Maitland, the caretaker and stableman. Then they would give the signal that the coast was clear, and everyone would dash into the granary and fill their empty fruit tins with wheat from one of the opened bags at the back of the shed. Some of it was roasted on flat tins over the hot coals. The rest was saved to fill initials that had been dug into the sloping embankment of firm yellow sand along the cliffs. These were left until the first rain came. Then all the inmates would rush down to inspect the cliffs. This grass graffiti revealed the new summer romances between the older boys and girls. But these three girls from the East Pilbara had no intention of participating. They had a more important task ahead of them. On they went, dashing down the sandy slope of the cliffs, dodging the small shrubs on the way, and following the narrow path to the flooded river. They slowed down only when they reached the bottom. Molly paused briefly, glancing at the pumping shed on their right, where they had been the day before. Turning towards it, she said to Gracie and Daisy, "This way." She ran for about 25 meters, crashing into the thick paperbark trees and the branches of the river gums that blocked their path. Molly strode on as best as she could along the muddy banks, pausing only to urge her young sisters to hurry up and try to keep up with her. She kept up that pace until she saw what she thought to be a likely spot to cross the swift-flowing river. The three girls watched the swirling currents and the white and brown frothy foam that clung to the trunks of the young river gums and clumps of tea trees. They didn't know that this became one of the most popular spots during the hot summer days. This was the local swimming pool that would be filled with naked or semi-naked brown bodies, laughing, splashing, swimming, and diving into the cool brown water during the long summer afternoons. Every now and then, the swimmers would sit on the coarse river sand and yank ugly, brown, slimy leeches off their bodies and impale them on sticks and turn them inside out and plunge them into the hot, burning mud. The next day, the swimmers would pull the sticks out of the sand and gloat at the shriveled, dry skins that once were horrible little creatures, ready to suck all the blood from their bodies. Or so the young people were led to believe. "The river is too deep and fast here. Let's try up further," Molly said, leading the way through the thick young suckers and washed-up logs. They continued along the bank, making slow progress through the obstacles that nature had left in their path. At last, they came to a section in the river that seemed narrow enough to cross. "We'll try here," said Molly, as she bent down to pick up a long stick. She slid down the bank into the river and began measuring its depth, just as she had seen Edna Green do the previous afternoon, while Daisy and Gracie watched patiently on the bank. "Nah, too deep," Molly said in disgust. "Not here." "Gulu, six degudoo," cried the youngsters as they ran to follow her through the wet foliage. The three girls walked along the muddy banks for another 25 meters when they came to a clearing, devoid of any shrubs or young suckers, where the floods had receded. In a couple of weeks' time, this place would become a muddy skating rink, where the girls of the settlement would spend hours having fun, skating up and down the slippery mud. The idea was to skate by placing one foot in front of the other and maintain your balance for a couple of meters at least. The boys had their own skating area further up in a more secluded place amongst the thick tea tree shrub. Peeping Toms never existed in those days. Each group respected each other's privacy. Nearby, a huge fire would be lit and kept stoked. When everyone had finished skating in the slippery mud, they would dive into the icy cold river to wash off the mud, then dry themselves by the roaring fire, dress, and return to the compound. Molly decided to follow the paths made by the cattle. Another attempt was made to cross the river, but once again proved unsuccessful. She walked on angrily, pushing the thick growth of eucalyptus suckers roughly aside, at the same time urging Daisy and Gracie to walk faster. But they decided that it was much safer at a distance, and they followed her muddy footprints in silence without any questions, trusting her leadership totally. They were still fighting their way through the tea trees for almost an hour when they heard Molly call out to them somewhere down the track. "Yardini! Bukala! Bukala!" Daisy and Gracie ran as fast as they could along the muddy path until they reached her. Molly was standing near a large river gum. As they stood gasping for wind, she said, "We gonna cross here." As three pairs of eager eyes examined it closely, they knew that they had found the perfect place to cross the flooded river. A tree leaned over the water, creating a natural bridge for them to cross safely to the other side. The girls scraped mud from their feet, then climbed onto the trunk and walked cautiously to the end, then swung down off the limb onto the slippery, muddy bank on the other side. They sloshed through the wet, chocolate-colored banks for at least another 2 hours, then decided to rest amongst the thick reeds behind the tall river gums. A few minutes later, Molly stood up and told her young sisters to get up. "We go Kieli 8 now, all the way." They obeyed without any protests. Ducking under the hanging branches of the paperbark trees, they hurried as best they could, stomping on the reeds and bulrushes that covered the banks of the fast-flowing river. Daisy and Gracie ran as fast as they could along the muddy path until they reached her. Molly was standing near a large river gum. As they stood gasping for wind, she said, "We gonna cross here." As three pairs of eager eyes examined it closely, they knew that they had found the perfect place to cross the flooded river. A tree leaned over the water, creating a natural bridge for them to cross safely to the other side. The girls scraped mud from their feet, then climbed onto the trunk and walked cautiously to the end, then swung down off the limb onto the slippery, muddy bank on the other side. They sloshed through the wet, chocolate-colored banks for at least another 2 hours, then decided to rest amongst the thick reeds behind the tall river gums. A few minutes later, Molly stood up and told her young sisters to get up. "We go Kieli 8 now, all the way." They obeyed without any protests. Ducking under the hanging branches of the paperbark trees, they hurried as best they could, stomping on the reeds and bulrushes that covered the banks of the fast-flowing river. The only sounds that could be heard were the startled birds fluttering above as they left their nests in fright, and the slish, slosh of the girls' feet as they trampled over the bulrushes.